listening to The Kula Ring, a podcast made for manufacturing marketers. Here are Carman Pirie and Jeff White.
Welcome to The Kula Ring, a podcast for manufacturing marketers, brought to you by Kula Partners. My name is Jeff White, and joining me today is Carman Pirie. Carman, how you doing, sir?
I am happy to be here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Nice.
Great.
Look, another episode where you and I are going to go otherwise guest-free, I suppose.
Yeah.
I can play the guest. You can play the guest on this one, maybe.
Sure,
Yeah.
I'll play the guest.
But look, I think it's a really, really important topic that we're looking to cover today because, there's no question in the world of B2B marketing overall, and certainly manufacturing marketing in a B2B context. Account-based marketing, delivering account-based experiences, account-based advertising, etc. It's as hot as it could ever be.
Absolutely. And I mean, you can include sales enablement and other marketing automation technologies in that same kind of tech stack bucket of things that are essential to do manufacturing marketing in 2022 and beyond.
Yeah. And I think as people are looking at, as they start to make investments in that area and build out skill sets, etc., there's a kind of a parallel thing happening in the realm of privacy and the impact of privacy legislation, various jurisdictions around the world, and what does that mean for as for marketers, for our ability to target and retarget and otherwise connect with our target audience. And it's a change that's coming, and you can't, if people aren't connecting these two dots, they need to be.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems is that this is on the radar of certain marketers that are out there, and it's certainly on the radar of the privacy community and the InfoSec community and those groups.
And the ABM tech people are certainly
Yeah, I think they're aware of it and they're planning for it because
or it's keeping them up at night.
And we'll paint the picture of why in a moment. But I think the general consumer, and I include in that kind of people within organizations like manufacturing, aren't necessarily aware of what's going on under the surface to enable some of these technologies that we have access to for the kinds of targeting that we want to be able to do, to be able to go down to an account level and provide a certain type of ad experience. There's some stuff going on there that if you knew, you may not support it.
Okay, well, look, let's talk about that really briefly. Let's talk about, I guess, if you could explain to our listeners then kind of what is the current state of affairs? How does this stuff work today? How does ABA work? Intent data, etc. How does that, just what's that landscape from a privacy and permissions perspective today?
Sure. So I think before you kind of get into the specific technologies like intent data or account-based advertising, you need to understand what cookies are. And we all know now what cookies are thanks to GDPR, which was the European sanctions that basically limited the amount of information that you could track without permission. And this is why we have pop-ups on every single site asking you to enable cookies or just letting you know that, hey, cookies are happening whether you enable them or not. But, and whether or not those things are within the, the viewpoint of following those laws or not, I'm not 100% sure. But, there's certainly people are aware that cookies are happening, I think. What people may not realize is that there are different types of cookies. So when you go and you visit a website, that website can collect data about you. They know where you're coming from, what your IP address is, what browser you're using. They may be able to cross-reference that information against other information that they glean from another site, and figure out who that company is. This is Kula Partners. I know that because this IP address has been registered to other sites that have tracked that information, and I can look up against that. And it's that third party lookup that really is impacting where privacy is going today. So if you are using data that is coming from other sources, third parties, so ad tracking pixels on a website that are not native to that site itself, so that could be, Google's pixel for tracking, it could be HubSpot, it could be any number of tools that are tracking data across numerous platforms and numerous sites. It's those third party cookies that they're looking to get rid of. And in some cases, that's already started to happen. Apple has come out at the forefront of this from a privacy perspective and said, we're not going to allow third party cookies by default. You can turn them back on if you wish to be tracked. But by default, in Safari on iOS devices and Safari on the Mac, you're not going to be tracked. Firefox has also come out with a slightly less toothy version of that. But they overall, they are certainly trending in that direction as well. And those would be the number 2 and 3 browsers after Chrome, which of course is owned by Google. And Google's revenue, as we all know, is from ads. It's not even so much the products that you might pay for, like Google Docs and things like that. It's really advertising that makes most of the money for Alphabet, the parent company of Google. So they have been on a path to also remove third-party cookies, but they've been reticent, of course, because this is their primary revenue stream. So they need to figure out a solution that is different from third-party cookies. And for a while there, they were saying that they would have that solution implemented by this year. They originally said this in 2019. It's 2022 right now. They said it would be implemented now. Now, here we are in Q3 2022, and they've pushed it out again to 2024. What they were talking about moving from is with third-party cookies, where you're tracking things across multiple sites. They're moving to something they called a privacy sandbox. And within that privacy sandbox, there was a federated learning of cohorts. So basically software that would figure out, what cohorts you belong to, what your interests are, where you work, all of that kind of thing. And that was known as Flock. Well, the Electronic Frontiers Foundation, a big privacy advocate in the US, came out and said this is basically behavioral credit scoring. And it's no better. In fact, it may be worse than third-party cookies in terms of the private data it collects on you. So they've pushed back against that. And Google has said, okay, we're going to put Flock to bed now, but we're going to need 2 more years to figure this out. So we're going to keep running third-party cookies for now, okay? And now they're working on something called topics, where basically they'll figure out what things you're interested in some other way and make it separate from the personal identifying data.
Right.
That's the whole intent here.
So it's like, basically, can we change it and not fundamentally change the output at all? Like, can
Yeah,
we build something that makes it sound like we changed it, but we still get all the same benefit?
pretty much.
Is where they're almost trying to get to.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at what Gartner and others are talking about in terms of where this needs to go in order to get to a place where there still is web-based or digital advertising that has benefit to the buyers of such advertising, so the ability to target by interest and by intent or what have you, and really what they're talking about is owned data. It's funny because you and I have been talking about having your own digital home in some way, shape, or form, not in relation to this, but in terms of not basing your platform on Facebook for your content.
Like owned media versus
Yeah,
social or paid media, etc. Yes,
exactly. So this is what they're suggesting the move is going to. So first of all, you really want to ensure that you're collecting good data that is first person data. So first person cookies, basically, or first party cookies rather. And that means that anybody that visits your site, you should be trying to engage with them in some way, shape, or form to get more information to enrich that data profile, because you can capture that information for yourself. So, using that to potentially illuminate more potential buyers who might be a little bit more up funnel, you're probably going to need to do that on your own site now. So maybe maybe that means putting out more content that is going to capture email addresses, and
Right, right.
building profiles like that, and integrating that with your CRM, of course, so that any data that you have there and on existing customers who have purchased things on your site, and all this will all allow you to be able to have better quality first party data, and then using things like surveys and other things like that to get more qualitative information to add to that. So once you have that, then what can you do with that? Well, currently the thinking is that there will become ways to merge that data with a publisher's data. So perhaps it's a site related to your industry where a lot of content is published,
Or maybe it's
and
Google.
or maybe it's Google, because Google is its own walled garden. Even though people use Google as a jumping off point to other places, they are allowed to capture where you go from your click on their search engine results page, whether that's an ad or anything else. If they own that property, they can collect that data. Well, there will become ways to interface your data with their data, and then target the specific accounts from your own data while anonymizing the information you get back from the second party, Google.
Your data and the publisher's data, use that to triangulate against the target in a way that doesn't enrich your first party data, but
Yes,
accomplishes your targeting objectives.
exactly. It may become harder to personalize the experience once that person arrives at your site, and you may need to kind of figure that out over time and begin to, do that innovative individual recognizance. Um, that's what you're going to have to work towards to get this to truly have kind of the level that we have now, where we can say, with cookies and with IP based detection and various tools like demand base or terminus or sixth sense or what have you, we can generally say, if I want to target Coca-Cola, I can probably get an ad in there that is going to be reasonably close to the target that I'm going for. That's going to become a little bit harder, especially for smaller organizations that may not have the traffic to build good quality first party data. So that's going to become like kind of the issue that CRO was for sites without a lot of juice.
Right, right.
You can't get enough people to actually see trends.
Man, I just want to kind of, it's interesting just to recap a bit of this landscape when we think about, we don't know where we're going to end up. We don't know the final solution that Google will end up implementing as a result of all of this. So,
Or how long it takes to get there.
right. So they've put, they've dog ate my homework. We've got to go back to the drawing board. That's already happened once. Who's to say that may not happen again? There could be lots of pivots along the way. I think it's just important to note. It's just something. It's an unknown, and it would be a fool's errand to probably try to predict in some ways exactly how that's going to function.
But I think you could predict that people are going to push to greater private
That
data.
trend is clear. Yes, yes, yeah.
Yeah,
But just how Google will eventually end up in a responding to that in a way that is officially permitted remains to be seen. And then the how the first party and publisher data will come together and allow you to execute more targeted campaigns. That, as you just said, it still hasn't been built yet. That
yeah,
it's supposed that those things will exist, but they don't exist now.
sure. I think you can see a bit of the path ahead if you look at the way pay per click is working now, where they're beginning to lose some of that data because they can't collect as much as they once could, because of GDPR and other things, as well as private browsers, which are still 20+% of the market are Safari and Firefox combined. So especially on mobile, there's
Indeed,
more
yeah,
people on mobile on Safari than on Android. So in terms of using the web, but you can currently use a bit more AI predictiveness within PPC advertising to choose who you're serving the ad to and what you're saying. So that's kind of where it's being suggested that no, we won't be able to, target your specific accounts if we can't integrate your first party data or if you don't have enough, you know, but we can tell you based on topics or whatever, kind of we can let the AI choose but not give you direct access to it kind of thing. So there are probably solutions that are machine learning oriented that we don't yet understand that could impact this and kind of provide a privacy layer in between by using some form of obfuscation. But it's hard to know what that looks like. But I think you can kind of see a bit of um, what's to come from the PPC side right now in terms of what's happening there.
That's interesting. Okay. So, I'm trying to think of what else is the kind of the so what of this, right? And one thing that seems to me is just jumps out is now that we have this extension, okay, marketers can breathe a bit of a sigh of relief for the next couple of years. But we know that you need to, if you're trying to be the type of person that plans ahead at all, which let's hope our listeners are those people, then it seems to me that you're really in a 2 to 3 year race to collect as much first party data as possible while you still have a bit more data collection options than you might have in the future. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And you're going to need to think about why organizations would want to come to your site in order to do that because you need to get them there in order to generate this data. So what's the draw? I suppose if you're, one of any of the number of amazing guests that we've had on this show in terms of the top tier companies, Rockwell and Schneider and TE and GE and those, that just you are a destination already.
Mm,
What if you're not and you're a smaller manufacturer in very niche category? you know how are you going to create something that will be enough of a draw to balance out when the paid media maybe isn't bringing in quite what it once was?
mm.
um and we
It seems like it's really kind of what you seem to be suggesting is that I don't know if we could say that content marketing ever kind of ebbs and flows. It seems like it's just been a constant bit of enthusiasm around content marketing, but it's certainly not a new idea now. But it seems like you might be suggesting we're breathing some new life into the notion of content marketing. I mean, if we've got to get people to a site to experience something, well, what they're experiencing is inevitably content of some description.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and what form that takes, you're going to need to understand your audience. And does that end up being video? Are you doing a podcast? Are you writing more papers? Are you making your product 3D models available on your site to be downloaded? All of those kinds of things. It
And an emphasis on organic distribution of that content to try to, because you're not going to potentially be able to rely on paid as much in the future.
No, you might need to leverage social in certain ways, to get the word out and all of that and provide value through those channels too. But yeah, you're going to have to build a destination. And then, you're going to really need to forge alliances with the developed communities, the quality communities where, the signal is a lot greater than the noise. So, I could see industry organizations, the publications that support different niches and industries. These are the potential opportunity for them as well to create a very unique product, because I think the future may end up being, rather than doing large media buys through central locations, you'll be doing media buys through individual publishing and community sites,
Right.
and targeting those specifically because that your users are there. So
It's interesting to think of this through the lens, of course, like industry trade publications that have an online version, which is inevitably a crappy website that gets over just inflated user traffic stats pumped out to try to drive more media spend. If you get people that kind of get that kind of business model out of their head, and understand that if we develop an audience here, that we're going to have maybe a different way of monetizing it than we had before.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It might be a bit of a serious opportunity for those trade pubs to actually make the digital presence a real thing.
Yeah, because what else are they going to do? You know, I mean, people will continue to advertise in their print publications for some time, I'm sure. I mean, the death of everything was over predicted, I think, but it's going to be,
It's a hard game.
yeah,
Tough
and I think,
racket. A tough racket.
yeah, it's a tough racket. I think you will probably continue to see more consolidation in that space as publishers look to get more of their own first party data. So that's not necessarily a positive.
That makes sense, though. I mean, the data becomes what's is the value, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, people are just like people demand to be sold to in a way that is as good as good an experience as it is on the consumer side. They're going to demand a level of privacy on in their business relationships that they expect in their personal relationships. And it's interesting to, a corollary to this, it would be um, email software, so sales enablement email software, not like Mailchimp type thing.
Mm.
But a couple of years ago, there was a company called Superhuman that came out with email tracking features that are not dissimilar to what was in HubSpot and any number of other mail tracking tools, that showed you when your recipient opened the email. It showed you where they were when they opened that. It showed you what email client they were using, and what device, and all that. And I mean, we had that feature up to that point for years with HubSpot and others. Um, but once it came out at a consumer level, and people who were just Gmail subscribers could put it in, like, it's not like a tool like HubSpot that costs hundreds of dollars a month that's only going to be used for good by businesses.
Right. Yes.
All of a sudden it's used now by by anybody to track anybody. Well, all of a sudden people are completely livid about this, and but rightly so.
Mm.
This is private information that it's giving up. And interestingly, all of those features evaporated from all the other tools at the same time, very quietly
Right.
as well. And I think you're seeing now, with email enablement and sales enablement tools like that, of diminishing usefulness due to bad data. I mean, how many times have you seen, immediate opens on sending a HubSpot tracked email or something like that, very obviously not happening. Um, all of those kinds of things. So I think a lot of those tools are going to start to have to change as well, because it will become,
They become less reliable. So then, yeah.
and as more organizations start to, put in place measures that make them, yes, it makes them unreliable, but it also, there will be places where you can't send a tracked email.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. I've got a couple of since we're connecting to email, let's start there, and I've got one other kind of comment around content. But on on the email front, I guess one of the similarities I think here is that we saw it when all of the GDPR and all of that legislation started happening around, and here in Canada it was Castle. So you needed to have an opt-in email list. You couldn't just spam people, things like that. And it was at that point where somebody like Seth Godin looks really, really damn smart, right? Because he said for a decade or more before that, way more than that, a decade before that, I think he was like, an opt-in email list that people want to receive
Yep.
is
Community of consent.
is the asset that keeps on giving. And in that moment, it's like, people, I know organizations that had lists that they were just regularly spamming, totally not opt in, and they were shaking money out of the tree. There was a reason they were doing it, right? And that quick money goes away, and the people that were patient and built the asset over time continued to reap the rewards. And here we have it again with first party data, right? That the companies that have invested 5, 10, 15 years ago in understanding their customer data model, building it out, connecting it to their target niches, et cetera, and really investing in that long before people even understood why they were. Well, those are the people that are going to really succeed. But they're so few and far between. There's like a handful of them in any category, if that. Um, so it's interesting to me that parallel between email and privacy changes there versus now what we're seeing at the account level, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's gonna, it's gonna change the available properties. What's worth buying now? Will Facebook ads still make sense for some organizations? Maybe.
Right, right.
Will organizations like Amazon, who have a massive walled garden
Mm,
of data, and to their credit, you can't buy that data. It's only for them to use, but they have like the ability to kind of leverage what they have and what they know in
mm-hmm.
an online e-commerce situation. It's pretty incredible what they've built.
Yeah, yeah, and you don't have to be particularly imaginative to start spinning on where that could go.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Their dominance just becomes even greater. But I think it's up in the air a bit as to whether or not this is a successful thing for Google and for Meta and others. But I
Fair.
think Amazon wins no matter what.
um, but the last kind of piece I wanted to cover is just interesting. There's been a big movement of late, frankly, largely driven by account-based approaches that said, you know what, you don't need to gate your content. In fact, you can ungate content, have your target accounts interact with that content, and you'll frankly know when they are. And then you can evolve your marketing and communications approach to that target prospect accordingly. Um, so there's certain, and also where there's just trying to drive people to consume more content, taking the friction away, and trying to get them to convert by other means, basically. So that's been the trend for the last, what would you say, 5 years even? Maybe more. I don't know. Maybe.
I think so. I think people started talking. Yeah, I mean, there were always detractors from the idea of that inbound conversion, top of funnel, middle of funnel. So
Right.
I think people have been talking about it for a while, but there's been a real push in the last couple of years to
Yeah,
make that
I mean, 10 years ago,
more.
you would have never heard HubSpot suggesting not to gate content. But then
No,
at a certain point, they're saying, you know what? Yeah, you don't need to gate everything. And, so there was a change. There's no question. I guess where I'm going with this is I wonder if this pushes us back the other way a bit. It probably says, says if you're going to drive a significant audience to your site, the quality of content is going to have to increase substantially. But maybe you need, maybe there's because of the data collection desires, maybe you end up gating more of it. I don't know. I'm curious. Tell me if
yeah,
I'm right or wrong there.
I think you're both. Like,
Yeah, that means I win, so that's good.
I suppose. I mean, from do we need to gate more content? Maybe. Do we need to gate different content? Absolutely. Like maybe there's a different strategy employed where you get the long tail out of content by having it freely available after a certain period of time, but new things are gated for a while. Like there's a lot of different ways you kind of think about how to collect some
There's a
some
variety of
conversion.
approaches there. It's more just like, will there be more pressure to do it or not?
Yeah, but I think there will still be benefit to having content outside of your own citadel fortress somewhat, because you're going to need that in order to generate that organic interest. So you're going to have to take a multi-pronged approach to it, and maybe you choose what to gate and what not to gate. Maybe things that get gated are more high value, like a model or a CAD file, or a spec sheet or something like that. But the white papers and things are more open and long form and linking into lots of those different assets and resources. So I think there's probably a few ways that you're going to do that. But yeah, you're going to need to start capturing some of that information. And I think that,
And capturing it in a way that can be, frankly, organized, repurposed, and is useful.
yeah,
This is not something that a lot of marketing organizations have tackled in a sophisticated way.
no. And simply adding more fields to your contact forms is not necessarily a recipe for having data that you can slice and dice.
Yeah, it's not exactly the road we're talking about. This has been fascinating. I guess thank you for letting me kind of pick your brain on this, because I think it's just kind of it's a huge change that's coming, and I think it's just really helpful, I think, for manufacturing marketers to kind of have some insight into it and to be aware of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's probably going to get a little more difficult,
Yeah.
until we figure out what the path is, and certain things aren't going to be available that once were. So
Indeed.
it'll be fun.
And
Anyway,
then
thanks.
there'll be something else changing, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly right.
All right. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to The Kula Ring with Carman Pirie and Jeff White. Don't miss a single manufacturing marketing insight. Subscribe now at kulapartners.com/The Kula Ring. That's KULApartners.com/The Kula Ring.